loans closed very quickly in this environment by doing a couple of extra things and making sure that you're asking the right questions of property management groups and or your borrowers and or sellers in these condominium and cooperative units. So the cleanup for today, just to kind of give you an outline. This presentation is a 45-minute long presentation. You can ask questions throughout this presentation by asking them in the chat function. At the end of the presentation, or 15 minutes prior to the end, 10, 15 minutes, depending upon how long we go, we'll start answering some of those questions and or all of those questions. You can ask specific questions about specific instances that you've experienced in the marketplace, and since these guidelines have changed, happy to answer them. We are going to be providing you with a resource page at the end of this presentation, which will highlight not only products that CondoTek offers, but resources within the industry for you to get answers quickly outside of CondoTek and or within CondoTek on specific questions about specific projects and issues as they relate to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac mortgage financing. If you do experience technical difficulties within this presentation and need some help reconnecting or need some help answering a question, you can always ask any question you like within the chat feature, and one of the CondoTek staff will respond to you quickly and hopefully resolve it for you. So that being said, again, I'm Orest Tomaselli. I'm the president of Project Review here at CondoTek. And Lisa Geloso is joining me, head of product development and customer success. And the way we're going to run this presentation is essentially, Lisa is, my source of truth, essentially, because she is the direct contact for most of the issues that are resolved within our condo project warrant process. So without further ado, let's start this off. So who's CondoTek? Here's a little bit of a shameless plug, but you should know who we are. So we're a condominium and cooperative data provider. We provide, an automated high quality review that comes from multiple resources. We have essentially four main products that we'll run over today and go through today. But essentially, we either provide condominium and cooperative documents to lenders for review internally at their own organizations, or we provide a product called the Condo Project Warrant. And that Condo Project Warrant is essentially us going out and collecting all the necessary documents for review on a specific condominium loan and warranting that specific loan for compliance with either Fannie Mae full review, limited review, Freddie Mac review, FHA review, and or specific portfolio project approval review based upon specific lenders' internal portfolio product lines. We count more than 700 lenders across the country as clients, and we provide this service and all of our services nationwide. The reason for this training today is based upon the new guidelines that were issued by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac earlier in 2022. And what we're seeing right now within the industry is the result of those guideline changes and, in some instances, condominium developments being ineligible for mortgage financing and cooperative developments being ineligible for mortgage financing based upon these new guidelines. The reason for the issuance of these new guidelines was, of course, the tragic collapse of the Surfside of the Champlain Tower condominium development in Surfside, Florida, which resulted in, I think, over 90 deaths. And, we've talked about this over and over internally and publicly. And I've said several times that, if we hadn't seen that video of that tower collapsing and, knowing how many lives were lost in that collapse, that we, doubt that there would have been very many changes to these lending guidelines as they've existed for, I think, more than a decade. For those of you who have been in the industry prior to the mortgage collapse in 2008, and the resulting changes that happened at that point in time to condominium cooperative lending guidelines, you'll know that condo lending was very different back then. And it was very quick and very easy. And the problem that happened in 2008 with the collapse of the mortgage industry was that lenders and agencies and the GSEs really got hurt very badly and figured out at that point in time that there were specific pieces of information that they needed in order to be sure that an originated loan could be closed within a condominium development based upon their guidelines, and based upon their review of condominium developments, for decades prior to that. So when these new guideline changes came out in January, not only was it kind of an echo back to what we've seen in the past, but it was an enforcement of what we've seen in the past. And many of the guidelines were in place, but these new temporary guidelines as they were issued, and we'll go through that in a minute, were issued because they wanted to essentially, the agencies and GSEs wanted to make sure that there was a hyper focus placed upon, different components of a condominium and or cooperative development. So that being said, what is the focus, right? The focus now on condominium and cooperative lending is a focus on the structural components in the development, deferred maintenance, special assessments, and reserves and financials. And the result of that, and what we're feeling in the industry right now, is a new addendum to the condominium questionnaire, and ask for meeting minutes to review to see if condominium boards and or co-op boards are talking about some sort of deferred maintenance issue within those meeting minutes. Frankly, at CondoTek, we don't place a lot of value in meeting minutes. Every once in a while, we'll get something valuable from them, but it's on a rare occasion that we'll find out something different than what we found out upon reviewing all of the documentation that we retrieve when performing a condominium project warrant. There now has to be an appraiser commentary on the condition of a condominium development and or structural condition of a development. And that has created new issues within the appraisal world because not every appraiser has the knowledge or expertise to comment on structural condition of a development. There's been this new, the focus on structural condition has, required the review of engineering reports and reserve study reports in many instances. And this heightened analysis is really, finding issues within condominium cooperative developments that, prior to these guideline changes would have never been known by the GSEs and or by lenders who are lending within these sites. So, there's an argument that these guidelines are very good for the industry, even though we're in this kind of period of flux where condominium cooperative developments are trying to comply with them. There's a 10% reserve line item requirement guideline that's in place, but that guideline has always been in place. However, for new construction developments specifically that where loans are being sold to Fannie Mae, the 10% guideline is strictly enforced, where in the past you could utilize a reserve study to show the accurate amount of reserve for a new construction development. So we'll delve into that today. We're going to delve into repair completion and how you factor that into deferred maintenance and whether or not repairs have been completed within condominium cooperative developments and what that means for eligibility. And we're going to discuss habitability That's one of the main results, the focus of these new guidelines. What the GSEs want to know is whether any of these issues, structural, deferred maintenance, special assessments, reserves, and financials, are going to impact borrowers' habitability or owners' habitability within these condominium cooperative developments. And there's a big focus on that. And we're going to talk about that in depth today. So, what is the marketplace, right? And what are we talking about here? So, essentially, all condominium and cooperative loans are done through, one of three vehicles. I mean, you could talk about FHA a little bit, but there's not a lot of FHA lending that goes on in condominium developments. There's some, but those guidelines for FHA haven't changed as a result of the Champlain Tower collapse. So I left it off this list, but essentially there's Fannie Mae mortgage financing or Fannie Mae condo lending, Freddie Mac condo lending, and portfolio and or non-warrantable condo lending. And those are the three main lending resources in the industry for originators, right? Depends upon what lender you work for. What's interesting is that the portfolio non-warrantable condo lending world has also changed and morphed since these guidelines came out. And in that bucket, we're going to also include jumbo condo lending, and that is a very unique world where risk or, perceived risk in condominium developments is really impacting what those lenders are offering, what interest rates they're offering that type of product at, and what types of terms they're offering that type of loan at, and what's available out there in the industry. So we're really going to focus in on these three main areas today. So what are, these Fannie Mae condo lending guidelines? First of all, it's really important to outline that, our warrant team, essentially internally, has done a really good job of helping our lender clients, kind of see what the issues are, and also resolving those issues so we can warrant a site. There is obviously this new unavailable status that Fannie Mae designates on condominium developments that they don't want to lend in. That new unavailable status is probably the most important part of this conversation today. There are over 1,000 condominium and cooperative developments listed as unavailable for lending in the CPM system that Fannie Mae has created. We've gone back and forth on this with Fannie Mae recently, where we were discussing whether or not that list could be made public. And Fannie Mae still hasn't responded on whether or not they can make that list public. But that list is available for Fannie Mae seller, servicer, lenders only. And you have to have access to CPM in order to see that list. I will tell you that that list gets updated, on a daily basis. Usually we try and download that list 1, 2, or 3 times a month, sometimes more, depending upon, what we're seeing, and, share that internally with all of our team members. It's important to note that, we require that you check that list prior to submitting a condominium project warrant order through us. So why is that list important? Well, being listed as an unavailable for lending on that list doesn't only mean that Fannie Mae mortgage financing isn't available on that site, but every other agency and every other secondary market investor has access to that list, meaning that if the ABC condominium development is listed as unavailable for lending with Fannie Mae, it's a good bet that you can't get that loan done with Freddie Mac, that there's really an issue with that development, that you shouldn't be, and that Freddie Mac shouldn't be lending in it, and that non-warrantable or portfolio lenders are also looking at that list and also making loans within that development unavailable. So being listed on that list is like a death nail for that condominium development, meaning that it's really very difficult to get mortgage financing in a development that's on the unavailable list without that development resolving the issues and getting taken off the unavailable list. The easiest way to get off the unavailable list is to fix the issues that put you on there. Typically, they're structural issues and or issues with commercial space in the development or non-compliance of the bylaws or insurance policy or budget. And that's what we typically see as the reasons why you're put on that unavailable list. But getting off that list, the easiest path to getting off that list is submitting the entire development to Fannie Mae for a PERS project approval so that Fannie Mae can review that project internally and essentially give it a clean bill of health and take it off that unavailable status. So we start there because it's the newest thing that's come out from these new guidelines with the most impact, meaning that if you are lending or originating a loan within a development that's on that unavailable list, you really got to stop right there, because it not only does it take a good amount of time to get off that unavailable list, but you really have to have the association, condominium board, and or property management group on board to take that development off the list. They have to do whatever whatever needs to be done that landed them on that list, whether that's fixing a structural issue, getting rid of a special assessment, completing the repairs that put them on that list, that may be to common area elements like mechanical elements or mechanical components in the site. So it's a process. So the first comment I'd make that, or best originator practices is, if you do come upon a development that is on that unavailable list, I'd say go originate somewhere else right now. It's very difficult to get off that list, and informing the development that they're on the list, and typically they know already, is probably an important part of your process. The second, major change in the condominium lending guidelines is the new condominium questionnaire addendum that Fannie Mae has released. Now, this addendum, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on it in a minute, but this addendum asks very specific and pointed questions about the structural condition of a condominium development and or cooperative development, the financials of that development. And that condo questionnaire is, in many instances, the make or break for being able to get a Fannie full or Freddie limited review, or I'm sorry, Freddie full review done on a condominium development. The problem with this new condominium questionnaire addendum that's been created is that, dependent upon where you are in the country, there are some states that, the powers that be within that state, whether that's attorneys who handle, condominium law or represent condominium developments, and or represent management companies, have outlined very clearly that they don't want their condominium boards answering the questions on that new condo addendum. So that creates a problem, right? If you can't get the answers to those questions, it's really difficult to provide, an approval for that site if the board is saying we're not answering whether or not we have structural questions. You then have to go into an entirely different process of trying to find any other data, whether that's public data on the site and or reserve studies, engineering reports, any other place that you could find information about the structural condition of a development and or whether or not that development is, a worthwhile development to lend in. It's a process, and it's very difficult. It's one that we at CondoTek handle very well. We have we have a giant team, essentially, that is trained to pull data from multiple different resources if we can't get those questions answered on the condominium questionnaire. So for us internally, it doesn't mean that we can't warrant a project if those questions aren't answered. it means that it takes whatever time it takes to acquire the additional data that's necessary to answer the spirit of the questions that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac now require. So there's also a point in the conversation here that it's important to discuss. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac differ in their lending guidelines in the new release of their lending guidelines. I'm going to go into that in a second. I'm going to show you how Freddie Mac is a little bit different than Fannie Mae in certain instances. In many instances, when we get an order at CondoTek for, let's say, a Fannie Mae full review, we may review that loan and that project for a Fannie Mae full review. And if it's non-warrantable, or if we can't warrant it with Fannie Mae, but can warrant it with Freddie Mac, we will inform our clients and let them know that if you can't do this through Fannie, but you certainly can do this through Freddie, or you may be able to do this through Freddie, and give them an outline of why. So we've addressed that internally and addressed that issue. But that condominium questionnaire, and I'm going to spend some time here on this, that condo questionnaire is so important that all the questions get answered. And if they're not, it really puts us and you as the lender in a place where it's almost impossible in certain circumstances to approve that loan unless you get that additional data to review in a engineering report, reserve study report, or something else that we can essentially hang our hat on to make sure that the project doesn't have issues with its structure or mechanical condition or components or financial issues within the development. Reserves are also another big part of these new guidelines. And, on new construction, which we'll delve into in a second, essentially you can't utilize a reserve study in order to reduce the line item for reserve in a new construction development and have it warrantable by Fannie Mae. But reserves in and of themselves are really important for condominium developments. If you look across the country, I mean, there are many states where condominium developments never had a 10% line item for reserve. And not only did they not have a 10% line item for reserve, but the way they collected reserve funds or collected funds to do repairs and maintenance was through special assessments. And both of those things are an issue right now. So when we review a condominium development, even if that development may have an issue with some sort of deferred maintenance, one of the first places we start is looking at the reserve account. And we make sure that they have enough capital set aside to, in some instances, to do those repairs and maintenance without initiating a special assessment. So when you're a condominium project reviewer, you're grasping at all different areas of that review to try and warrant that specific loan. Reserves happens to be a big one. And I could tell you that in several instances, we have been able to approve condominium developments which were initially rejected by the lender for one reason or another, regarding an issue, let's call it, deferred maintenance as an example, where we looked into the reserve account and said, oh, but hold on a second, they have $3 million sitting in an account, and they have this reserve study that says that they only need, 300,000 of it over the next 8 years. They have more than enough money to pay for the repair and maintenance on this specific component. So this is an approvable project as per Fannie Mae guidelines because they have the capital and wherewithal to do it set aside already. So reserves are really important. I bring that up because it's one of those things that you want to ask as an originator, how much is in reserves in this condominium development? How much do they have set aside when you're originating the loan, if you can get that information on day one? Special assessments are also a major challenging issue for these new Fannie Mae Condo Lending guidelines. So not all special assessments are bad, and some condominium developments operate via special assessment, as I just outlined. But again, a special assessment in and of itself could be the reason for a rejection, dependent upon what that special assessment is for, and or if the work for that special assessment hasn't been completed. So I'll give you an example. let's say you have an HVAC system that an association has put a special assessment in place for in order to pay for the repair and or replacement of that HVAC system. But let's say you're 3 years into that special assessment and the special assessment is still being collected, but the HVAC system has been repaired, has been replaced, is fully functioning, uh, doesn't impact the habitability of that condominium development, and they have a substantial amount of reserves in addition to that special assessment, that's a development that you can approve, and that Fannie Mae is, very willing to accept a loan like that and warrant a loan like that, as long as you do your due diligence in reviewing those items. Deferred maintenance is a big section we're going to cover today. Lisa's going to cover it for me. She's the expert on it. What is deferred maintenance? What is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac characterize as deferred maintenance? And just as an overview, deferred maintenance is when a condominium development hasn't done the necessary repairs and or maintenance to the mechanical or structural components within the development. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want to know about that. And they want to know, what's coming in the future, what costs are coming in the future, which is why most of these developments right now are now running out to get reserve studies. So they actually have this information, which is another topic we'll cover in a second. But that's a good overview of what's going on as far as what the guideline changes are. And now we'll delve into it a little bit more deeply. So as I said earlier, Freddie Mac condo lending guidelines are a little bit different than Fannie Mae's. Now, I could run down a list of all the reasons that they're different, but if you really kind of like look deeply into these guidelines, they really revolve around two specific differences. First is the reserves. So where Fannie Mae says you have to have a 10% line item for reserve, and you can no longer, as a lender, review a reserve study for a development to have anything less than a 10% line item and still be warrantable. And essentially what that means is if you're looking at an operating budget and they don't have a 10% line item in the operating budget for reserves and they don't have a PERS approval on the site, there's no way to do that loan with Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae does give you the option of utilizing a reserve study in a condominium development through their PERS approval process, but they are very clear about outlining that you have to have a 10% line item for reserve or that loan is not warrantable to Fannie Mae, outside of the PERS approval process, obviously. So reserves are a major issue. Freddie Mac takes, I think, a better view of reserves. There are a lot of condominium developments across this country that are not collecting a 10% line item in their operating budget for reserves. And those developments are doing so based upon an engineer inspection and or reserve study, essentially a professional going out to the property, looking at every single component and saying, this is how much you need to set aside for the repair and maintenance of that component over the next 30 years. So Freddie Mac has said, look, we're going to still leave this in the lender's hands. If a development doesn't have a 10% line item for reserve and has a reserve study, the lender can certainly warrant that development based upon that reserve study and based upon how much capital the development has in their reserve account. So what you'll run into often is a development that has $3 or $4 million sitting in a reserve account, but they don't have a 10% line item in the operating budget, but they have a reserve study. And those developments are still warrantable with Freddie Mac. And we warrant those sites for our lenders every day of the week. Again, we need the reserve study. It has to be essentially a reserve study that's less than 3 years old. We need to see, what the balance is in that reserve account. But we typically make those types of determinations, within a day, once we get all that data in. There's also a difference with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines where Freddie Mac allows, or I should say requires, that insurance deductibles be funded within the operating budget. There's a little bit of a workaround on that guideline, meaning that, if you have an insurance policy that says that there's a $10,000 deductible, you essentially have to fund that deductible as a condominium development within your operating budget and/or have that money in cash sitting in a reserve account. And it becomes a problem in certain areas of the country where, let's say, for earthquake insurance, you have a development that has a $5 million deductible. Should an earthquake happen and the whole entire development be, deemed, uninhabitable. In those instances, in those areas of the country, Freddie Mac lending is a little bit more difficult, because if those developments don't have that money sitting in their reserve account, you can't get that project approved. It's almost, it's virtually impossible. I wouldn't say don't send it to us for review, but because in certain circumstances we've found that some of these developments have that capital sitting in their reserve account, but it's one of those things where these are the guideline changes. These are the differences between those two lending guidelines or agency guidelines. The other point, even though I outlined reserves here, but just to kind of drill down on Freddie Mac lending. Freddie Mac takes an alternate view on new construction condominium lending as well, where Fannie Mae states unequivocally you can't use a reserve study to reduce the 10% line item in a new construction development. Freddie Mac takes the viewpoint that yes, you can utilize a reserve study, and yes, you don't need a 10% line item for reserve, as long as there is another formulaic process for funding the reserves on the new construction development. Now, state by state, this is different, but let's take a state like New York, where I live. It's very common for new construction developments to require purchasers to contribute 2 months worth of their maintenance payment at closing into a working capital and/or reserve account. So Freddie Mac states that, if that funding is in place and you have a reserve study that shows that you need less than 10%, those loans can be funded by Fannie Mae. Apologize. Those loans can be funded by Freddie Mac, and Freddie Mac will allow us to warrant those types of sites. So just important differences. Whoops. There we go. So portfolio and jumbo lending. And to drill down on this just a little bit, because I think it's important for the industry. Look, almost every single portfolio lender out there has somewhat aligned with Fannie Mae's guidelines. There are additional overlays from all these lenders, especially on jumbo lending and jumbo loans. Essentially, they're all looking into the structural components within condominium developments. So it's important to note that a loan or product that was available 6 months ago may not be available today, and that portfolio and jumbo condo lending guidelines have changed substantially with the issuance of these guidelines. You want to look into them, especially if you're brokering loans out to some of these portfolio lenders, and/or look into your own internal guidelines if you are a lender on this call that has an internal portfolio product. So, what does new condo lending look like right now? I mean, look, what we see, as I outlined earlier, is Freddie Mac continues to allow these reserve studies to be utilized to fund less than 10%. What we're seeing in certain areas of the country is that, on new condo lending, most developers don't add in a 10% line item for reserve, and they don't want to at the initial stages of a new construction development, because essentially it's money out of their pocket that they can never claw back. It just goes into the reserve account. It's not being funded by the homeowners unless you're in a state where it is, based upon what I outlined earlier. So although you need strict compliance with the 10% reserve guideline if you're going to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac allows a reserve study for new construction development. Portfolio lending, look, it warbles a little bit. Some portfolio lenders allow mortgage financing to be available in a new development with a reserve study, whether that's jumbo or normal, portfolio lending, but across the board, a reserve study is going to be necessary. Co-op lending, for co-op lenders on this call, Very similar guideline changes for co-op properties. The problem with co-op lending across the country, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but essentially it's the same exact requirements as there are in condominium lending. The only difference is that while you probably have a good percentage of condominium developments across the country that have a 10% line item or that have been thoughtful about this process, uh, every single co-op building seems to be a train wreck. Like we run into these problems over and over again on co-op buildings where they have no capital, they have no money in reserves, they follow this plan of, changing their underlying mortgage or get refinancing their underlying mortgage should they need any capital. This poses a major issue, especially in certain areas of the country, like New York, as an example, where there's an abundance of co-op buildings, where other state laws that are coming into play regarding, the electrification of the country, something called Local Law 97, is wreaking havoc on co-op lending compliance, because a lot of these developments are going to have to spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to get compliant with the new state laws regarding carbon emissions, and now they fall into this category of deferred maintenance. So co-op lending is very challenging right now and very difficult. However, we have done a really good job at CondoTek of, one of our new products is the co-op project warrant, where we are able to warrant cooperative developments for lending, individual loans for lending, and we provide on all of our products a life of loan guarantee. Essentially, if we warrant it for the life of the loan, we're warranting that site, and or that specific loan within that site, I should say. And should there ever be a repurchase, it's our repurchase and not the lender's, which frankly is one of the reasons that we've become so popular in this industry right now. A lot of lenders are looking for that type of warrant product, and I think, to my knowledge, we're the only vendor in the country that provides that type of warrantability. So she's been quiet this whole time. Lisa, are you there? You still have you on mute? Can't hear you, Lisa. Oh no, we have technical issues with Lisa. Well, look, I'll take the deferred maintenance section. Lisa, if you do pop on, jump in at any point in time here. So, deferred maintenance, right? Here's the definition of deferred maintenance. Here's the exact definition from Fannie Mae, right? We can read it out loud. I don't think it's important to do so. But look, deferred maintenance is really based upon, does it impact habitability of the development? Does the project have deficiencies, defect, damage that's severe enough to affect the safety or soundness or structural integrity, that needs substantial repairs and rehabilitation, that impedes the health and safe and sound functioning of one or more of the building's structural or mechanical elements? We run into deferred maintenance issues every single day. I mean, look, we're reviewing hundreds of condominium developments every month, actually thousands, multiple thousands. And we run into this issue on a regular basis. What's deferred maintenance, what's not? And we can warrant many developments that you would look at on the face of them and say, well, here's a deferred maintenance issue, just by gathering all the appropriate documents that are necessary, whether that's reserve studies or engineering reports or recent inspections of that property. But there are some out there that we can't warrant and that it's impossible to lend in. So I'm going to give you the average number of rejections that we have here at CondoTek. And this has been written about in several industry magazines and newspapers recently, and I've been quoted over and over again about this issue. So, we review several thousand individual condominium properties per month, and we have documents and have reviewed more than 60,000 properties recently, and we have a good amount of data on condominium developments across the country. And here it is by the numbers. about 7 out of 10 condominium developments are compliant with these new Fannie Mae and or Freddie Mac lending guidelines. Around 2 out of 10 have some sort of issue, like a deferred maintenance issue or a budget issue, and or a special assessment issue. But that issue typically, with some hard work, can be resolved and a loan can close within that development. And then there's 1 out of 10 that I wouldn't lend $5 to, right? And why? Well, there's a major structural issue within the building, or there's a major issue with, the fact that they have no money whatsoever in reserves. And if a borrower gets a loan within that building, they're destined to have a special assessment in the next 12 to 24 or 36 months. And it's not going to be a small special assessment. I mean, there are buildings that, I wouldn't want any of my family members living in, nor would I want to lend anybody $5 to buy a unit there. So if you overlay that into how many reviews we actually perform per month, boy, you're talking about at least 200 to 250 developments a month that we're reviewing that are totally non-compliant with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac's lending policies, and it shouldn't be lent in until they fix themselves up. So it's a major issue that's plaguing the condominium marketplace right now. And, we're seeing some changes over the last 7 or 8 months. We're seeing condominium developments really start to pay attention to this. Why? Because unit values within those developments are plummeting. There's no way to get mortgage financing. Well, guess what? That unit isn't worth as much as it was worth when you could get a mortgage on that building or in that unit within that building. So deferred maintenance is a big issue. The second big issue, of course, and I wish Lisa was on because she does such a good job here, but unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to me drone on about this. Special assessments. Look, when we look at special assessments, we have to determine if they're eligible or not. And what determines eligibility? Well, the secret in the industry is if you read the new Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines, the special assessment guidelines haven't changed very much, right? They still want you to know what the length of the special assessment is, what the reason for the special assessment is, what the total amount assessed is, what the repayment terms are. But the key is number 3 over here, right? And I'm going to add to that number 3, which is you need documentation to support that there's no negative impact to the financial stability, viability, condition, and marketability of the project. What you want to focus on is condition, the word condition. Structural condition? Is there a structural issue? Does that special assessment, create an additional review for you? Do you have to look into that project more deeply because there is a special assessment? Absolutely. What's the reason for it? Does it, does it outline a repair or maintenance issue on a structural component or a mechanical component or habitability? What's the adverse impact of it? And that's what the focus here is. So it's important to know what, special assessments are an incredibly important part of the review process. Reserve studies and engineering reports, look, they have to be less than 3 years old. We see that a reserve study these days provides more information than we can get from any condominium or cooperative board. And in many instances, removes liability from condominium cooperative developments just by having the reserve study in place. And that's a change in the marketplace. That wasn't always the thought about a reserve study. Many condominium boards and cooperative boards wouldn't do reserve studies because they didn't want to publicly outline what the condition of their development was. And in fact, there was a AICPA letter that went out in the 1980s that specifically stated, do not do reserve studies in condominium cooperative developments. It was advice for board members. That whole thought process has changed. Look, there is some clarity now in understanding that reserve studies and an inspection of the property actually protects board members and homeowners more than it implicates them in some sort of future litigation on the site. and that's as a direct result of the Surfside collapse. So reserve studies are being done at a record number in condominium and cooperative developments across the United States. And they outline component condition, what the reserve balance is, a funding plan, whether or not there's a special assessment. But what they really outline is structural condition and mechanical condition of the components. And arguably, they're the most valuable thing that we get our hands on when we're doing a review. So first question for an originator, ask for a reserve study report. So what are the best practices here? And then we're going to jump into some questions in a couple of seconds. But look, I keep on saying look. Sorry, I'm a New York guy. You really have to determine global eligibility really early on. Is the project or property on the unavailable list? Check it. If you're an originator and or a lender who is not a Fannie Mae seller servicer, you work with lots of Fannie Mae seller servicers. You sell loans to seller servicers. Ask them to provide you with a weekly list or a daily list of the unavailable list through CPM, because right now that's the only way you're getting it. If you do have access to it, just check the list. Is the project on the list? If it's on the list, stop right there, because it's a process to remove a development from the unavailable list. And the easiest way is really to go through a Fannie Mae PERS approval process in order to do that. Ask the buyer, the seller, the property manager, have they had issues with lending in this property? Do they have a reserve study? What are the issues? Are there special assessments that they're aware of? Is something coming up? One quick phone call can make your process of origination, taking a loan from origination to closing, that much quicker. And believe me, the property managers know whether or not there's an issue with lending in the development. We used to hear this, comment from the property managers on a regular basis. Well, XYZ lender is lending in the project, and you're telling us that the project is unwarrantable. Yeah, well, XYZ lender is out of business now because they've had 80 repurchases because they couldn't sell the loans that they closed. So it's always such a joke for us internally. We understand the pain, but for us, when we hear from an originator that XYZ lender closed the loan within the development, you have no idea how they closed that loan, whether it was a Fannie Mae loan, Freddie Mac loan, or an internal portfolio loan, whether they did it right or not, or whether or not that loan's going to be repurchased if they closed it as a Fannie Mae full review, or a Freddie Mac full review. So although you might have a lender who is, some sort of outlier closing loans within a specific non-warrantable site, it's not a best practice, and it's not something that you should be doing, or a risk that you want to essentially create for the lender you're working for. Most importantly, and this is such a kind of 1 + 1 = 2 comment, you got to order these vendor services early. As soon as you have an intent to proceed from a borrower, if you're working with us, order a condo pack, order a condo project warrant that day, order your appraisal, order your title, because in some instances, we're going to need the appraisal or title report to make a determination on a site that has a problem. So you want all of those things ordered at the same time. We have had instances where, we get an order, 2 weeks after the loan was, put into processing for documents. And of course, we need everything to be done yesterday. It just doesn't work that way in this industry right now. Property management groups, attorneys are advising their boards not to answer questions on condo questionnaires. You have to find alternate sources of truth in order to warrant these condominium developments. It's a very difficult process. We make it easy, we make it look easy, but I will tell you that you got to order those services very early on within the process. What are our services before we answer some questions for the group here? Condo Pack, if you're just ordering condominium documents from us, on average, we deliver those documents within 5 days. The Co-op Pack document delivery is about the same turn time. Co-ops happen to be a little bit of a different animal, where now co-op boards are running every single questionnaire through their co-op attorneys very difficult to get questionnaires back quickly on cooperatives. So sometimes the turn times are longer on those types of properties. The condo project warrant, which oh no, it's on top of my head. It's our essentially condominium document acquisition and review and warrant of a specific condominium loan and or project, where essentially we take on all the risk. When we approve that site, we give a life of loan warranty, and we warrant every single, we warrant that loan for the life of the loan. It's being adopted by hundreds of lenders across the country just to remove risk from their process of review. And we have a whole retail division where if you do have a development that's on the unavailable list, we can take that project through the PERS project approval process. Essentially, we analyze and warrant that project to Fannie Mae, handle Fannie Mae PERS approvals. We handle FHA, single unit approvals, the SUAs, and global project approvals. And we handle global portfolio approvals through our retail division for new construction and established developments as well. I didn't want to do that. There we go. Wait, hold on. There we are. All right. So here's your resources. First of all, you can always contact sales at CondoTek should you have any questions, but here are our email addresses. And unfortunately, Lisa, I knew she was having technical difficulties, but unfortunately she couldn't get on. But you can always email me, email Lisa at CondoTek. Our director of sales is Mike Perlman, and his email is here, and Melinda Engel works in our sales department as well. You can email any of us for any issue. I will tell you that you'll get a quick result if you email Lisa or Michael or Melinda. Sometimes it takes me several hours to respond to an email request. That's just because of the amount of emails I get. But happy to provide you with an answer should you need it. Here are the best resources in the industry right now. This Fannie Mae lender letter, the temporary condo and co-op guidelines, is the best place to find the right answer about a condominium or co-op lending guideline that has been issued within these new guidelines. I got to tell you, I'm sorry, I take it back for a second. There's a link. The top link is the temporary condo lending guidelines for Fannie Mae. The second link is the Freddie Mac Bulletin temporary condo guidelines, where you can review essentially the exact guidelines as they were issued. The Fannie Mae FAQ link and the Fannie Mae Appraiser FAQ is what I was referring to. Those are the two best resources in the industry for information about condominium properties and policy from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Essentially, if you've been in the industry for any length of time, you'll know that it's very difficult to get Fannie Mae and or Freddie Mac to answer a question in writing. I mean, I know underwriters that have printed documents sitting in their desk drawer of an answer that Fannie Mae responded on a specific topic, and that letter and that printout has been in their desk drawer for 15 or 20 years. So the answer is this. This is in writing. You can find a lot of the answers to the issues through these links. And a lot of the questions that have been asked are really great questions. So take a look there. And it's a great resource. We use it internally all the time. You have all of our CondoTek listings here. Our blog is a really great resource. We post a lot of important information about the industry. So log in, take a look at our blog, take a look at our LinkedIn. We're constantly posting articles about what's going on, and it's a great resource for you for information. So that being said, you can access this presentation. Melinda is going to send it out to everybody who's on this email. She'll send a link to this presentation today, and I think a recording of it as well. You'll have essentially the PowerPoint at your, the ability to review your PowerPoint as well. So that being said, let me see if I can answer a couple of questions. If we can't get to the questions, we will provide you with a written explanation. So somebody asked if we were forwarding the PowerPoint. Yes, we are. Wow, not a ton of questions today. Not a ton of specifics. Well, all right. So look, this has been a great experience for me. I love doing these presentations. I'm happy to provide you with any additional answers you have, or to your questions regarding specific instances. And I am really happy to provide you with resources in the industry to get the right answers that you need in order to be able to close these condominium and or cooperative loans. Again, most of the resources that we have are through our condominium project warrant product and or condo pack. We could provide you with an enormous amount of information. What the final point I'll make to you before we get off this call today, and answer maybe a question or two more, but the final point I want to make to you is that these guidelines are outlined as temporary, right? They don't really look temporary. Okay, this is the new direction in the condominium world. I think they were issued as temporary guidelines. I think that in the future, you'll see that these are adopted. I think there's very few changes that are going to be made to these guidelines. Maybe there's going to be a change from Fannie Mae on the reserve issue for new construction. But I'll tell you that I think this is what we've got for a long time. I don't think there's any end date to these guidelines. And I think that Fannie Mae is happy putting a project on the unavailable list and reducing their risk in lending in a development that isn't compliant. So place your orders early. Make sure to ask as many questions as you can about the process, and happy to have you all on. Any other question we didn't get to, I will answer via email, or Lisa and I will. Thanks very much, everyone. You should be getting a copy of this presentation soon.